Welcome everybody to the Eternal Spoiler Breakdown. My name is Pojo, and today we're going over 4 new spoilers from the Fall of Argenport set, plus any others that might happen to come up on Discord in the moments while we are recording, because that seems to happen every now and then. First off, we have Time Flies, a 0-2 flying clock roach, with each player has +2 maximum power. So this is the third clock roach out of all of the sets. We had the basic ones in Empty Throne. We had the Toctics in, I believe, the, I think it was, oh man, I've actually forgotten the name, Omens of the Past. And now we have one more, Time Flies, which, very, very cute punny name and a pretty cute punny unit. So it's a 1-cost 0-2. The +2 maximum power is the fairly unique, like it is a really solid ramp overall, just because you get your ability to play essentially one time Time Flies, second time Sandstorm Titan, which is, you know, sort of the ideal path if you want to be playing weird Clockroach decks that do ridiculous things very, very quickly. Oddly enough, this card doesn't play that well with a lot of other Clockroaches, even though it is buffed, of course, by the standard Clockroach, which goes by the name of Clockroach, since if you use Clockroach's +1/+1 ability, it buffs all of the Time Flies in your deck, as well as, of course, the Toctics and other Clockroaches. So you can get some bonuses onto this card if you want to, but I would say that they don't have a lot of synergy with each other, which is interesting. If you want to do Fast Crown Clockroach, you might as well just be using Initiative Sands, because that'll get you there at the exact same speed, and also it won't buff your opponent's stuff and give him access to all of the scary stuff that kills Crown faster. But you can do some interesting things with this, certainly. If you want to play really super fast aggro decks, there is some potential for this to do pretty interesting shenanigans. I'm not sure if it's suited for aggro or mid-range. It seems best with mid-range type stuff, just because there are a lot of interesting time cards that you can play very, very early with this card, including, of course, your standard Sandstorm Titan. That being said, you do have to be very careful with the amount of influence that you're playing. For example, Time Flies can play you into a Sandstorm Titan on 2 and a World Bear Behemoth on 3, but is that going to get you exactly what you want? I don't know. It's hard to say. And the main risk here is, of course, if you play Time Flies on turn 1, then the disadvantage is your opponent can just play, say, a Champion of Fury and then a Torch off of a Skycrag, a Skycrag Seal, a crest of, not a crest, a Seed of Fury. So that kind of thing can get really, really nasty for you really, really fast, because your opponent can still play very, very small aggressive things and still kill or silence the Time Flies. Time Flies can play if your opponent is playing first, then you can play a Time Flies and have it immediately silenced by a Valkyrie Enforcer. There are a lot of bad things that can happen if you play Time Flies on turn 1. That being said, having a bunch of copies of Time Flies out does give you the ability to cast some pretty ridiculous spells, so if you want to make some interesting ramp happen, then there is some potential to maybe make this card do weird and interesting things. So as far as the card goes, its power level is not high. It's all drawback for a really risky play. And if you can get that risky play to work, if you can build the deck to do whatever Time Flies wants to do very reliably, or if the Time Flies is just, you have the ability to protect it or do something along those lines to make sure that it is actually alive, and then you can utilize that advantage, then it's reasonably strong. But otherwise, not so much. The card is just very bad to play by itself. You have to build around it, and you have to have a very specific type of deck. What that deck is, I'm not sure. I've got some suspicions. There's actually a really, really good card coming up that might be pretty good with this type of deck, which if you want to do super turbo ramp, then maybe Time Flies has some potential there. But you need very, very good sweepers, and you need very good ways to control the board at your top end, because if you aren't doing that, then Time Flies just does not allow you to live for very long. It kills you faster than it buffs you up. But it's an interesting card. I think when RNG announced this on Twitter, he said that it was going to be one of my favorites for some reason. I don't know. It's good. It's a good combo card. Certainly is fun, and I like the pun. It's quite delightful. All right, we got next up. We got Resurface, which was spoiled on the Reddit earlier today. Okay, Resurface is a warp. I think it was yesterday. It's a warp card for 4 at slow that says move a spell, that is a spell, not a card, of your choice, to the top of your deck. So it's a tutor for spells that you use to tutor cards to the top of your deck, but it does not cost you card advantage if you play it off of the top of your deck. So unlike most tutors that would normally do that, you don't lose out on a card if you get that card from the setup. So, as things go, this card is very slow, but it's got some really interesting potential. The main thing is that if you can play cheaper warp cards, then you can do some pretty crazy things with it. Like, if you could somehow Workshop Forge this down to 0 and then just start warping all sorts of random stuff, Resurface is a really interesting one to just tutor something with warp and then immediately warp that card. You can also use it to grab some weird cards that are helpful on top of your deck, like Static Bolt or Tessia, or like any number of things where if it's on the top of your deck, you can do something weird with it. There are actually a couple of interesting cards that can do that kind of thing, and potentially some good ways to play around with them. You could use this in like an Ikaria blue style deck to pick a, well, you can't really pick a unit, but I was thinking that, yeah, if you want to do something like buff a particular spell for an Elysian Trailblazer or do something ridiculous, like maybe that works out for you, but you do have to have the power to do it as well. It has some potential for combos and some potential for like doing weird and wibbly things, but it really depends on how much of a discount that you can get out of it. This is one of those cards that's going to play really, really well with Crimson Firemaw, and there's actually 2 of those cards in the current spoiler set that we're going to be talking about. So if you want to resurface something and then immediately buff it with a Crimson Firemaw, that's probably the best result that you can get. Something like a blue, red, yellow deck that resurfaces a Heart of the Vault, attacks with Crimson Firemaw, and then gets the Heart of the Vault anyways, or does things like that, is reasonably strong. You can do some cool stuff that way. The key thing here, of course, is making sure that you get the value out of it that you need, but Resurface can also be played as a slow spell in some control decks to pick up very specific removal cards and very specific bombs. So if you are the type of deck that absolutely needs to get your Harsh Rule on 5 and doesn't have anything to do on 4, that's sort of where you play Resurface, because it's pretty easy to cast the card. Even if you lose the tempo, you're still going to get some very, very good results off the Heart of the Vault, or off the Harsh Rule, or the Leave a Witness, or whatever else it is that you're planning to play. So I think where this card most likely belongs is in a really big blue-green deck using things like Martial Ironthorn to get lots and lots of extra power, and then trying to draw extra cards with, you know, Channel the Tempest, other ridiculous nonsense. If you can do that kind of stuff, then maybe Resurface gets some play. As it stands, the card is particularly not strong for a tutor, but of course tutors do have the ability to warp games, pun intended, so you can do maybe some interesting things with it. I would say that it's appropriately costed and appropriately powered down for a tutor. I like tutors that are bad. Like, I think Celestial Omen and Resurface are both like pretty well costed and do like about what you need to do. Like, they have enough drawback that they actually make it so that the game doesn't get too degenerate, and if you are playing them, then you're playing them for a specific reason that your deck is very well built around. And that's the kind of thing that I really, really like. So yeah, like overall I would say this card is very well designed, but it is not particularly strong, and you are going to have very specific decks for it as well. So that's sort of the theme of today's spoilers in general, is that all of them are going to be particularly good in specific decks, but they aren't, you know, like going to be super game changers in other decks. They're good build around me's nonetheless. All right. This one might actually be okay, and it looks like I got a lower quality version of it, so let me just grab that higher quality version real quick, because I opened the wrong thing. Yep. Alright, save. Good. Got it. Alright. I could just tell from the image. Okay, so this is Rizan Greatbow Master. Reset Greatbow Master. I think we heard about this guy before, and he was called Riza, so maybe he got gender swapped. Hard to say. 5/4 flying reckless with lifesteal when you have 3 or more spells in the void, and summon, deal 3 damage to an enemy. So that's a lot to unpack for 6 double red, double green. This card is similar to Jek the Bounty Hunter in terms of what it does. It's a pretty aggressive, fairly well-costed unit with some interesting abilities, but it has a summon effect that gives it some onboard value. Not strong onboard value, but enough to make a difference in the game. To that extent, I would say that this card is probably going to see maybe just a little bit more play than the red-green Jek did. The red-green Jek saw tiny amounts of play. It wasn't amazing, but it was pretty okay. It had good evasive abilities. It had some reasonable shenanigans available. The silence effect was useful, and the main problem it had was that it really couldn't stand up to Ikaria in other decks. That being said, this is a reasonable Valkyrie. The Reckless isn't too much of an issue since it's got flying and also lifesteal, so it's usually trading with something in the air, and if it's not trading with something in the air, it's absolutely stealing the game by attacking every turn like it's supposed to. So, like, if this card is down and if this card is alive, it's a problem with your opponent. Your opponent has to remove it. And then the summon effect means that you often get some sort of card advantage or board advantage off of the card as well. All of those things lead to what I would say is going to be a reasonably strong card. The stats aren't perfect. 5/4 is on the weak side, but reasonably strong for a flyer, especially a lifesteal flyer. You can get a 4/6 at this cost for pretty easy. You can get some 5/5s at very cheap in Shadow and other setups, and you can get some cards with better skills in general in blue or purple. But red-green doesn't have a tremendous amount of great flyers, and the amount of weapons that you can put on this thing does make those stats significantly better if you're using good lifesteal stuff to happen. I think that overall, this card seems like it's probably going to see a little bit of play. Like 3 or more spells in the Void is not that hard of a bar to clear in Rakano's stuff. It does mean that you have to play less attachments, which makes Riza a little bit worse in some aspects, but if you're playing your standard Torch Vanquish shenanigans with a couple of other tricks like Finest Hour, then Rizan makes a really interesting sort of top deck, or a sort of top deck finisher if you want to go into like your mid-range stuff. That could be pretty cool. Overall, like, I think this card does require a lot of hoops to jump through, but it's got some reasonable power as well. So, yeah, you have to build a little bit around it, but a little bit less than than the other two. It's not a combo piece. It's just a very solid unit all on its own in most decks. So, yeah, we'll see if this is going to be a powerhouse. I think it's definitely got some strength. It remains to be seen. There's just so many moving parts on this one, whether this is going to be like fantastic. But yeah, at 6 cost, I'm not certain. I think it might be a little bit difficult. And also as a legendary, I don't think it's going to be like an automatic craft for people. So we might not see this in the meta for a while. But if there is some things that people want to do with it, then yeah, it's got 2 skills or more, which is pretty useful for certain types of decks. It actually has 3 skills if you want to do like an Honor the Fallen type thing, or you care about Hero of the People, that kind of stuff. Like, this is a pretty good card in those types of decks. There's some interesting play around with it. Like, you can certainly fiddle with it and do some cool things. Rakano doesn't have that many good 6-drops, so this is a fine replacement for Jack at the very least, and I can't really think of anything else that really goes in that slot. So it's something to do while you're trying to set up for Ikaria. But the question is really going to be if you're okay with running this when you're not running Ikaria, or if you're okay with running this alongside Ikaria, and that makes it a little bit trickier to decide, because going up to 6 is admittedly a lot easier than 7, but certainly not something that most Rakano aggro to mid-range types want to do. So we will see. All right, last one. This one's pretty fun. End of Days. Okay, we'll talk about the art first because that's interesting, but the card obviously does have some bonkers stuff. We'll read that in just a second. Okay, so first off, End of Days. Card art is depicting an event which we haven't seen a lot of things happening yet, so we're getting a pretty significant lore preview here. That's Caleb, Eileen, and Talir. And it looks like Caleb is, fighting with Eileen. Something has essentially happened that is causing Talir to intervene and mess with Caleb. I'm not sure I like this art. The card, like, Caleb's got a very derpy expression going on, and I'm not entirely certain what's happening, which isn't a great thing if you're looking at card art, but like Talir is there, but it's kind of hard to say exactly what she's doing. She seems to be coming out of a rift, probably created by the Eternal Throne, and then I guess clocking Caleb with magic. I don't know. I have no idea what Caleb is doing, but it makes the entire card a lot funnier. So yeah, we'll probably see some other cards with actual art depicting what's going on between Caleb and Eileen before Talir shows up. But this is pretty predictable as far as the overarching plot goes. We know that Talir is concerned with the larger threat of the Radiants and whatever the heck is going on with them, whereas Eileen and Caleb are sort of heading towards a confrontation at this point, since Caleb has sort of gotten to his resolution and is now coming back for the throne of Argentport, which Eileen currently has access to. In fact, we might even be able to hazard a guess that the person holding the gun in Long Live the Queen is Caleb. Could be a thing. I don't know. It's hard to say. But yeah, we might see some more cards depicting that conflict, and that'll be interesting to see. So let's talk about the card. 6 cost, double time, warp. I'm so glad it has warp. Draw a sigil of each faction from your deck. Tribute, which means that if a unit goes to the void, either from your hand or from play this turn, then you get to tribute. Play those cards depleted instead. Okay, so card advantage-wise, this is a 5-for-1 or a 6-for-1. If you are playing 5 sigils in your deck, and you are also playing End of Days, which, hilarious. They are the worst possible cards that you can be drawing, which is to say, a card of every faction in your deck, which I'm not sure why you want all of those. But like, if you ramp them out, then I think you're feeling pretty happy about yourself at the end of the day, because yeah, overall this card is just a mini New Tomorrow. It is something that immediately gets you to a ridiculous amount of power, and if you're playing it in just like straight Combre 5-color nonsense with Martial Ironthorn, then you play Martial Ironthorn, you play some power, you either warp or play End of Days, and then you just wreck it with all of the power that you have just played. Like, you're gonna go up to 20 like immediately. So yeah, pretty cool stuff. But of course you have to activate the tribute, you have to have Ironthorn out, you have to do all of that stuff, and you're still kind of banking on the warp for extra card advantage. So, you know, there's some things that could go wrong here. The thing that strikes me immediately for this card as far as combos go is this is clearly an insane Vodachan finisher. Like, if you are playing Vodachan and all of your sigils have Destiny, then it doesn't matter. You don't actually want to play the tribute. You want to just draw each sigil from your deck so that you can immediately play them and just utterly destroy your opponent. You can also use this to warp a bunch of cards for Stonescar Excavator. So if you wanted to play like weird 5-color stuff and then just toss a ton of power into your void off of discards, then that's also something that you could potentially do. I don't know if that's going to really work all that well, because Stonescar Excavator is a pretty bad card, but yeah, there's definitely shenanigans that you can get up to when you are drawing that many cards and doing that many things. So the card ramps you immediately to 10 or so, which is pretty nuts if you want to play cards like Aid of the Huru, cards like Scourge of Frosttome. If you want to do anything that requires just a ridiculous amount of power, End of Days is going to get you there if you can get that tribute out. Also, it's a pretty surprising trick, so you can definitely do it to ramp out some crazy turbo shenanigans. The general cost of it is that you kind of have to be running 5 colors, so you're kind of announcing that you have End of Days ahead of time, and you also aren't necessarily guaranteed to get the full power out of it if you aren't running at least, say, 2 to 3 of each power, which is probably not going to happen. Like, at most you're going to run like 2 copies of each sigil and then a bunch of crests and waystones. So yeah, you got to play a weird power base to get End of Days to work reliably, and this card will frequently only be a 3-for-1 or a 4-for-1 in ramp. Get you up to 10 still, but it won't quite get you as much as you want it to get you. Still, I would say overall, like, the card advantage and the ramp on this card is pretty bananas. I really like playing deep end, like heavy power stuff. So like, this is a card that's clearly built for me. Like, this is a card that of course I love, and I have no problems with it existing in the format. Like, I think it's really fantastic. It's does some very, very silly things, and it just sort of suits my play style of play Ironthorn, play stupid ridiculous stuff at the top, and greed the heck out for every possible advantage. The card is not a tier 1 card by any means. Like, maybe one ramp deck gets there, but I'm not sure what that ramp deck looks like. I don't think it has Time Flies in it. I think it would have Ironthorn in it or some other things, and I'm guessing that Aid of the Huru in particular just plays super well with End of Days. Like, that just seems like a no-brainer as far as things go. So yeah, like, End of Days, Leave a Witness, Aid of the Huru, bunch of green, bunch of blue, very, very tiny amount of red and purple. Like, yeah, that seems like something that you could maybe do. So, could be fun, could be fun. The card enables all of the other stupid shenanigans that I like. Invoke the Waystones is a little better when you've played a bunch of sigils out of your deck. You can play all sorts of stupid shenanigans, and yeah, no, this card is just the greedest of greed cards. It's extremely heavy risk and extremely difficult deck building for a very high reward. And so, yeah, sure, has my undying love. Very, very good. Not a power card by any means, but I do like it. I'm very happy that this card exists. We're gonna craft a lot of them. We're gonna play some really stupid end of the days decks. It's gonna be a good time. You'll see a lot of these brews. It'll be good. Alright, so we saw End of Days, and End of the Line is already a card that we have seen in previous spoilers, so we know that there is a cycle here, and the rest of that cycle got released just as we were finishing up the video. So we're going to go ahead and talk about the other the other end cards, all of which are 6-cost warp legendaries in a cycle, each of which involves a particular scion. So we have, of course, Vara's End of the Line, showing Vara like infiltrating the Xenon cultists and poning them. We have End of Days with Talir, showing, of course, Talir intervening between Eileen and Caleb. And we have End of the Barrel, which, hey, if you want to see Pojo have his conspiracy theories confirmed in real time, there's Caleb holding the gun. Alright, so End of the Barrel is a warp, plus 8 power this turn, plus 10 power this turn if you tribute it. I believe all of the 6-cost cards are warps with tribute. So this is a cycle of cards that work as tricks if you kill something and you have 6 power. So you are always going to be wondering about those trades if your opponent is attacking into kind of a weird trade. You have to be very, very careful about what kind of things he can play off the top of his deck, even if his hand is empty. That adds a little bit of mystery and suspense to the game. I really like the way that warp tricks work, and I think that post-combat after a tribute is a really good way to create that sort of space where it's like, okay, now I have to watch out for this card, even if my opponent's hand is completely empty. That's a cool thing to note. So End of the Barrel makes for a lot of power. The main thing that this can do, of course, is pop out some ridiculous legendaries. You can do some crazy stuff. End of the Barrel can, at the very least, just warp a Caleb out on turn like 6, so there's some potential for like the minor ramp that this card gives you to get you some decent bonuses if you want to play like straight tokens, do some interesting shenanigans. Just hard playing this card does not seem like such a bad idea if you're trying to do something kind of screwy. I don't think that at the moment there is another way to get +2 power in a single shot, so if you want to just suddenly surprise blow out your opponent with a Caleb, End of the Barrel is actually really, really solid for that, which is good because it's a Caleb card, so yeah, it seems like the reasonable thing to be doing there. As for the tribute, I don't know if the tribute is terribly strong. Like, it is possible that you end the barrel into like a flame blast and get yourself a really shenanigans reach setup there. Like +4 power is an immediate way to get a big blowout that you can then like just destroy your opponent with. So maybe you can do some cool things with End of the Barrel in that sense. And one of the things that you can actually do with End of the Barrel here is you can set up like, if you can in some way layer End of the Barrels on top of your deck, End of the Barrel is a card that plays into other warp tricks. So you can warp End of the Barrel into 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 Flame Blast, and that's a pretty shenanigans turn if you want to do that kind of thing. The main question is, how do you get that many cards on top of your deck? And the answer is, I have no idea. Maybe with like some Second Sight Excavate shenanigans, you might be able to run something cool out that does that kind of interesting stuff. I think this card, despite being a weird ramp card, is more powerful than it looks. It's probably significantly more powerful than Kindle has been thus far, or any of the other ramp cards that we've seen. There is just a lot of potential for this card to do good things, basically by getting you to that 8-drop early on and getting you the early blowout with Caleb. Like, I think that's just probably going to be pretty strong. And yeah, like, maybe this card does something. Overall, it's certainly not good card advantage, and it doesn't do anything other than kill your opponent, so you really gotta be sure that you have a plan to kill your opponent with End of the Barrel. But if you can do it, then more power to you, because this card doesn't do anything else. So yeah, it's fast, it's aggressive, it's maybe good. We will see how good this card ends up being. I think that Fire is going to be able to play some shenanigans out with it. So yeah, let's see if we can get that going. I would love it to be a fast spell, but yeah, it doesn't have to be, and certainly that doesn't really work with the tribute mechanic as well. So, all right, End of Hostilities I think comes a little earlier in the story and shows just Eileen being a Bamf queen. We have the Warp play a copy of a unit and Tribute play 2 copies instead. So this is not a cheap mirror image by any means, but it is one that doesn't cost you a card to play, which can be quite reasonable if you're not losing any card advantage out of the setup. So this is a card that you're probably pretty happy to play off the top of your deck in a big blue deck that's playing a lot of ridiculous stuff. If you're playing a Caria blue in particular, then you probably feel pretty happy just copying off like a Throne Warden or an Acaria itself. Basically, if you can just get good Aegis units down, End of Hostilities does some pretty shenanigans stuff. I think it's particularly strong with Jotun Feast Calder, and the 2-copy Tribute is really, really good if you can get it going. This tribute is going to be hard to activate. The value off of it is quite good if you tribute it, but I think overall, once again, this card is generally better played before tributes and can maybe do some good things that way. And the power level's just pretty mediocre. This one doesn't actually do a tremendous amount of shenanigans, but I think it's got some decent potential. We haven't seen that many tribute enablers yet, but I do suspect that there are going to be some that may cost less than 1. There is currently the 1. We have the sacrificial willing sacrifice, I think his name is living sacrifice. So there's a 2 cost that can sacrifice himself, and there may be a couple of other units. In fact, I'd say they're guaranteed to be a couple of other units that can sacrifice to create tributes, which will make cards like End of Hostilities significantly better. So yeah, like these cards could get really nuts if you have ways to play those tributes, and so you're gonna have to watch all of the different aspects of these cards to see if that trick can actually do something cool. This can copy opponents' units, unlike other cards, so that's actually something to note about this. This doesn't play copies just of allied units. You can pick up something of your opponents if you need it, and that includes like their crowned Mokdos, their ridiculous Stone Petter Alchemists, and Clockroaches, and other stupid junk. That line of nonsense leads to interesting, fun shenanigans. You can copy up World Bearer Behemoths, you can attack in with very small units, and you can get some crazy, crazy trades. Like, that actually does give this card a lot more play and a lot more strength, and it makes your opponent probably a lot more scared of blocking you when you have 6 power up. So yeah, that is potentially very reasonable. That being said, it's usually better to play copies of your own units just because they might be better for your strategy. If you're playing 2 copies of your opponent's units, you're probably pretty happy. So yeah, this has some cool potential. I'm intrigued to see how this card works. I'd say this is the most easily playable of the 5. It's not the most powerful of the 5, but it's very, very solid overall, and it just happens to be a 6-drop warp card that you can play most of the time onto almost any board. So yeah, seems quite reasonable. All right. Next up, we got one more. So we have seen Caleb, Talir, Vara, and Eileen, and that just leaves Roland, who is dead. That's the end of his story. Yeah, so we have a Mokdo card here. Warp, kill all units. One more fantastic Wrath card. The tribute is that end of the story cannot be negated or blocked by Aegis. That blocked by Aegis thing is particularly big and actually makes end of the story a very viable alternative to a harsh roll. Not only does this card not always cost you anything, like it is also a card that can do just bananas things to boards that your opponents would otherwise be establishing. So if you're playing crazy Ironthorn Ramp, which is something that I really like to do, this is definitely the card for you, because not only does it regularly not cost you card advantage, but it also is a card that just blows out the entire board, does very similar things to Harsh Roll. The question's going to be, Do you want the harsh rule for its extremely fast tempo, or do you want the end of the story for its ability to shut down Skycrag, Aegis, and all of the fun green Aegis cards that are quite ridiculous and hard to deal with? So yeah, that's an interesting question. I believe end of the story is still blocked by Svetcha, but it does beat stand together decks, which are pretty important, and that means that this card is going to be an automatic sideboard in any deck that wants to run harsh rules against those types of lists. So yeah, it doesn't look like blue, green, yellow is long for this world in terms of being like a tournament standard. Well, it will still be a very, very good deck, but at the very least, we're going to have good, reasonable answers to it that we can easily sideboard or market in to make sure that we can kill through the stand together in a way that actually helps us out. So yeah, that's pretty cool stuff. Not only that, but this is like an extra harsh rule. You can do this plus Leave a Witness plus harsh rule. You probably don't want 12 harsh rules in your deck, but if you're playing fantastically stupid ramp, then sure, why not? And it's also an extra harsh rule that happens to be very good in other situations that harsh rule would not be good in. So you can do this on the turns where the harsh rule is bad, and then you can set up for better harsh rules later. I'd say this one is really just insanely strong and control. It's not always going to be the alternative to harsh rule, but it's nonetheless a very, very good card, and the card advantage that it grants is particularly strong. So if we had to rank these in order of like power and usability, I'd say End of the Story probably ends up being first. End of Hostilities is probably a close second. Vara's is a close third, End of the Barrel is probably fourth, and End of Days, of course, is fifth, but, I mean, it's so much fun. Why wouldn't you play it? Yeah, like, all of these cards do, like, kind of ridiculous things and are very, very fun tricks. They have cool tributes available. They do fairly useful stuff. But, like, the playability of them is really dependent on whether or not you can play them consistently, and End of the Story is the most consistent, followed by End of Hostilities, with the Lifesteal one being a close third for its ability to just do interesting shenanigans. That being said, Caleb and Talir both have really cheaty options. They're going to be really fun decks to build with those options. This is a really cool cycle. I really like not only the storytelling that's involved with it, but I also like the art. I like the design of the cards. I like the Warp Tribute mechanics, and I like what each of these cards is doing. I also like that it's a 5-color cycle that includes a nice, solemn, very sad Mokto mourning Roland's death. That's a good way to just, like, remind you that Roland is dead for good. Pretty please let him be dead for good. And, yeah, like, overall, I'd say that is good storytelling. Cool stuff. I'm glad that that exists, and that's just a neat bit of mechanical stuff going on in the cycle. It's a nice summary of where we are in Eternal, and it's a good place to leave the story for release. So when Eternal comes out, we'll have this nice complete arc that should be winding up for the next big setup, which is going to be probably those Radiants and whatever the heck is going on with the Shadowlands. And yeah, that's crazy good stuff. Okay, back to your regularly scheduled outro, I think. See you guys later. That's it for today's Eternal spoiler breakdown, barring any immediate surprises. I think we're all good. So, oh, there's some art for cards like Argenport Veteran and Honored Skyguard, but yeah, we'll cover those cards when they come out. Beyond that, thank you guys so much for watching. I had a really, really fun time reviewing these cards, and I think End of Days is going to be, in particular, just a delight. There's going to be some shenanigans happening in the next set, and I am so glad that Eternal has the capacity, the balance, and the potential for those shenanigans. Overall, overwhelmingly positive. Very happy that these cards exist, and I'm glad we got to see some interesting tech coming up in Fall of Argenport. So let's see you guys next time, and have a really good night. Cheers.